Welcome to the first episode of the MMA Roundtable. Thank you so much for tuning in. We've combined two podcasts. It's myself and Chris from the MMA Podcast.com and Ray and Patrick from MMAmental.com. And we had a big fight this past Saturday, Jones versus Belfort. A lot to break down, and we're looking forward to doing this every Monday. And I guess without any further ado, let's get into it.
All right.
Yeah, so we're really pumped. You just heard Patrick there. Patrick and Ray both belonging to MMAmental.com, and Chris and myself being a part of the MMA Podcast. We're getting them connected right now. I think we got Ray through on the line. How are you doing, Ray?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty funny. Blog Talk gave us a new way to connect, and it looks like it did work for Chris, so I'm going to disconnect him from Cha and connect him right Cha. Chris? I don't know really what that sound was.
Hello?
Hey, what's up, buddy?
Hey, guys.
It was actually giving me a hold tone, which was pretty fantastic. But yeah, we got the four of us rounded up. So yeah, definitely looking forward to breaking down UFC 152 with you. But before we jump into that, we got to give our introductions. Obviously, you recognize Chris and I from the MMA Podcast.com. We've done about 15 or so episodes. And both Ray and Patrick have been recent guests on the podcast, and we were talking and figured it'd be a great idea to start an MMA Roundtable show. It's going to be a little bit more focused. We're probably going to focus more on the actual card instead of being real comprehensive, getting into the news and all that. And it'll probably be a little bit shorter of a show. It'll be an hour and a half, where the MMA Podcast is about 2 hours. But I've been talking nonstop for the last couple minutes, so I'll pass it over to Ray and Patrick. Take it away and introduce you to the MMA Mentalists.
Okay. All right. My name's Ray. I co-host the MMA Podcast with obviously Patrick. We do something similar to yourselves, where we get guests on each week and interview them. Our show varies between 1 hour to 2 hours, but like Jake said, we were excited at the opportunity to team up with Jake and Chris. We love talking MMA with people who like us, so we just thought, yeah, why not give it a go. Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Patrick, the other co-host of the MMA Mental Podcast, and like Ray and Jake have alluded to, we've been chatting on each other's podcasts and kind of doing a little co-promotion, shouting out each other on our recordings, and so here we are with the MMA Roundtable.
Definitely.
I know Chris is out there somewhere.
Yeah, I'm here. Hey, guys.
we got to save the best for last. The cream always rises to the top. How are you? The tip. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing awesome. And I was thinking, Ray has such a silky voice, and Patrick is very smooth. So, how would you guys like to be known as silky and smooth?
Sounds good to me.
I like it. I think it's very apt.
Silky and smooth, and definitely, if you haven't heard MMA Mental, they have had some great guests of recent. They had Steven Quadros on the last episode. They had Renzo Gracie, Chris Lieben, and they definitely have a few guests coming up soon that should be of pretty good note. So, yeah, check them out. And without any further ado, let's get into UFC 152. It was a hell of a fight. I think all MMA fans out there kind of felt the same feeling. It had been a long time since we had a UFC card. It was going to be UFC 151 3 weeks ago, but that obviously got canceled. First card in UFC history to get canceled, and we had to wait 6 weeks between cards, but we finally had MMA a couple nights ago on Saturday night, and it definitely impressed us. It was a great card. Patrick?
Yeah, it certainly was a great card, and I think the biggest surprise of the night was probably the fight between Vitor Belfort and Jon Jones. And I know personally, I didn't think that would be too much. I thought that would just be a quick little tune-up for Jon Jones, and he got himself into quite a position and almost lost his arm. And playing around in Vitor Belfort's guard.
Definitely. And we would go ahead and lead off with the Jones-Belfort fight, but we got to have a reason to make you guys stay tuned, so we'll save the best for last. I don't know if we have enough time to go over every single fight, but let's start off with the main fight of the preliminaries, Magalhães versus Igor Pekrajic. And, we saw Magalhães, which for some reason Pekrajic didn't have a stand-up fight, took it to the ground, and you don't want to be on the ground with Vinny, who armbarred Igor Pekrajic in the second round. Ray, what did you think about that?
Well, I was surprised. I mean, we're all in the same boat. We all pick our winners, and Igor had looked pretty good recently, and I just thought he was going to get a TKO victory. But I was actually surprised at how good Vinny Magalhães looked. I mean, he looked completely different from the time he fought before. And I know, obviously, Igor didn't help himself by getting involved with the grappling, but he still had to get the sweep and get the armbar. And it was a lovely finish. The technique for the finish was great. I actually thought that should have won submission of the night, personally.
Yeah, that was just incredible. I mean, we talked about it with Patrick on MMA Podcast last week, how it seemed that Vinny has taken his training to a whole new level, and it seems to have paid dividends. He looked absolutely fantastic, like a man on fire, and I really wasn't surprised how it ended, especially considering Pekrajic engaged the ground affair in the first place.
Yeah, and that's kind of the funny thing is Pekrajic's game plan going into that, it looked like he just came out and was immediately engaging in the clinch when everybody thought he clearly had a stand-up advantage and a chin advantage. And I think the most ironic part of it all was that after the match, Igor Pekrajic had tweeted out that, the fans want to see a grappling match, or they don't want to see a grappling match, they want to see a fight. And, it was kind of almost underhandedly bashing Vinny Magalhães, but it's like, dude, you jumped into the guard of a multiple-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Like, what do you think is going to happen, and how are you going to complain when you have probably the worst game plan you could put together for a guy of his caliber?
I have to say as well, the line about not wanting to see Jiu-Jitsu, any fan is just as excited by, or any real fan is just as excited by an exciting armbar than a knockout. Definitely.
It was pretty perplexing why Igor Pekrajic would call out Magalhães in the first place. It's pretty crazy. He took the fight to the ground. It wasn't like he was trying to stand it up and Magalhães kept taking it down. He was, the one who brought it to the mat, which makes his statement even more ridiculous. It would have been ridiculous in the first place because this is not a kickboxing match, and no one really knew. I was in the surprise van. A lot of playgrounders will relate to that, and everyone's saying, what is going on? Why is Pekrajic trying to take it to the ground? And I think pretty much every learned fan of MMA who knows each fighter's styles was really perplexed by that, and it was kind of cut and dry. Even though Pekrajic was a big favorite by his game plan, that's how he lost the fight. If he would have kept it standing, we don't know if Vinny would have been able to take him down, clinch him up, get the armbar, but for some reason Pekrajic had a death wish and decided to go to the ground with someone in Magalhães who has a lot of credentials grappling. He had gold in the 2007 World Jiu-Jitsu Championships, a gold in the 2011 Abu Dhabi Championships. It's just someone you don't want to mess with on the ground. And Vinny Magalhães back in the UFC, his first stint since 2009. He's 1-0, and we probably should see him get a top 15, top 20 guy in the light heavyweight division after this. Chris, you agree with that?
Yeah, man, absolutely. Welcome back to the UFC, Vinny. You look great, and who he's paired up with next, I can't really think of anyone coming off of a decent win streak that's not already scheduled to fight. Who do you guys think? Maybe someone with a couple wins or one win? Any thoughts?
There's a fight. I'm going to the UFC card this weekend. I'm looking up to have a ticket, and there's a UFC light heavyweight fight this week, which is debuting a UK guy called Jimmy Manoa. Now, if Jimmy Manoa comes off with an impressive win against Kingsbury, which I think he will, that'd be a perfect matchup. Both kind of on there. I know he's not top 15, top 20, but he is. If he wins, he'll be on the rise, and it's kind of like two UFC newcomers. I know we've had Vinny in the UFC before, but this is obviously a new stepper. He's like a different fight to last time, and let's see who moves up the ladder. So I think that if Jimmy Manoa beats Kingsbury, I think Manoa versus Magalhaes would be a good fight.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that suggestion right there. I think that's a good one, and it's really hard placing Magalhaes in a fight, especially his first fight back in the UFC. Igor Prokraik, he's a really tough draw. I mean, we've seen that in all of Prokraik's UFC fights. He's just a brutal fighter, and so Magalhaes had a good showing in getting past him. So it's kind of, do you set him up with just whoever's available? Do you step him up the ladder? Are they going to progress him slowly? It's going to be interesting to see what they do with him from here.
Yeah, one name that came to mind was James Tehuna. He fought in July, broke a bone in his left hand, his left foot, but he beat a Joey Beltran, who's known for having an iron chin. And I think James Tehuna would be a nice, definitely not in title contendership now, but he also is on a pretty good streak of wins. I believe he's won his last 3 since losing to Alexander Gustafsson, which, I think Vinny's still a win or two away from fighting a up-and-coming guy like a Glover Teixeira or perhaps even a Phil Davis or Ryan Bader, someone of that caliber, but he definitely proved that this stint in the UFC will be longer than his last stint. I think last time he went 0-2 in the UFC, so he finally got a UFC win, and he's definitely improved a lot since his last UFC fight against Elliot Marshall at UFC 97.
I just thought he looked like a completely different fighter. I didn't recognise him at all from the former, Ultimate Fighter 8 contestant. He just looked so different. He looked, going back to his basics, getting his jiu-jitsu in. He looked really, really good.
Patrick?
Yeah, I'd agree. I find it kind of hard to judge really his progression just based on, again, Prokraik's game plan. I'd like to see someone who could test out his stand-up just a little more. But hey, like I said, this is a tough out for anybody in Igor, and so that's definitely just a sign of market improvement. I mean, when you go from losing to Elliot Marshall to beating Igor Prokraik, you have to be doing something right.
I just thought of the perfect fight, gentlemen. Little Nogueira. Little Nog is coming off of one win against Tito Ortiz by domination, has a great ground game, and has the kind of stand-up that Patrick was just talking about, where someone who could actually test that and could defend the takedown or the clinch. I think Little Nog versus Magalhaes would be phenomenal.
That would be an interesting stylistic match. If you're listening, Joe Silva, you should definitely think about that, because I couldn't agree more with what you just said. Both have some of the top Brazilian jiu-jitsu in the 205-pound division, and neither are slouches standing up. What do you MMA mentalists think about that matchup?
I don't know whether he's ready for a Little Nog yet. I don't know if that's too much of a step up. I like the James Tuna or the Manoa match, because I think they're both at the same level. But I just think Little Nog might maybe get another win or maybe another 2 wins, then team up with a Little Nog. I think Little Nog's too highly ranked at the moment.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think it is a fantastic matchup, like Chris said. And Little Nog, he's a legend, fantastic game, some of the best boxing at 205, and I think that would just be another super tough fight for him. I'd like to see it, but for the sake of Magalhaes and his career, I'd like to see him maybe make a lateral move at this point and fight someone maybe like a James Tehuna, like Jake, I think you had suggested.
Definitely.
the Tahuna matchup a little bit more, simply for the fact that Tahuna hasn't really had that real stiff test yet, and I think Ray was kind of right with Lil Nog being a little bit too much stylistically great, but Tahuna seems like the perfect guy.
Yeah, I would definitely put Little Nog in my top 10 light heavyweights in the UFC at least. So we'll probably see in the upcoming month or so who Vinny Magalhaes gets next. Obviously, Pekraig losing definitely won't be cut from the UFC, but he'll obviously have a much lesser caliber opponent in his next fight. But we probably could talk about this one fight the entire podcast and run out of time, so I'll move on up to the first card on the pay-per-view. Actually, it was a catchweight fight, and before we actually talk about the fight itself, I wanted to hear your thoughts on the catchweight. Something that kind of surprised me. Charles Oliveira couldn't make weight. He weighed in at 146.2 pounds. He was literally just 0.2 pounds above the limit of 146, which at that point, you've got to understand these guys cut so much, and to not have another 0.2 in your body to cut, you're at a tremendously exhausted level. So I don't know if that worked into the fight or not, but you would think like just 0.2 pounds, that's like a few ounces. You would think you could cut off your hair or something. But the thing that kind of turned my head was, even though he weighed in over, the UFC decided not to fine him, which kind of sets up a bad precedence as far as if you weigh over, you need to get fined, period. Even though it was only by 0.2 pounds, you need to get fined, and them not fining Oliveira kind of sends a precedent out as, you can weigh over as long as you're 0.2 over. Just, don't weigh in 0.4 over. I really don't know where exactly you draw that line when it comes to fining people for weighing in over. Patrick?
Yeah, I think you're incredibly right about the precedent that sets. You're starting making exceptions right now, and then you have people missing weight for title fights, and it's, Travis Lutter versus Anderson Silva all over again. And for the fighters, how can you go and compete in a certain weight class if you're not going to be able to make that weight? I would imagine the ultimate goal of fighting is to, hopefully one day be the champion or one of the best in the sport, hopefully contend for a title. And you can't do that if you can't make weight, because you'll never get that title fight. Because we know, if you're fighting the featherweight division in the UFC, the limit for that is 146 pounds. But if you're fighting for the title, you have to come in at 145. So even though 146 is accepted for all non-title featherweight bouts, Oliveira still came in like Jake said, 146.2, or I think it was initially 146.4, and he was able to cut 0.2, and he just couldn't cut after that. And it's just not good. You can't have that precedent. Especially guys have been cut for not making weight. You look at your Anthony Rumble Johnsons, and it's just not a good move. They really should have laid the hammer down, much like Cub Swanson did in that fight.
Yeah, I've never understood guys missing weight. Now, I've never had to cut weight myself, but having, I had friends in high school that were wrestlers, and to be honest, it is kind of a science, but there's 3 parts to being a fighter. There's training, making weight, and fighting. Those are the 3 things you got to do. So if you're not doing well, on one aspect of it, you're at like 60% of your workload, man. That's all you got to do is make that weight. You're a professional. You're paying people to help you with that. So I've got no respect for anyone who doesn't make weight. If it's like a one-time thing, I get it, but you are a professional athlete in the world's premier MMA organization. So I'm on the same boat as you guys.
What about you, Ray?
Yeah, the cutting weight thing is strange. I read it as being 4 ounces with 2 pounds, probably the same thing. 4 ounces is, like you say, it's so minuscule. I was surprised they didn't just say, just go and cut those extra 4 ounces personally. Like you said, they could have even cut the guys there. There's loads of things they could have done without putting them at risk. The fine thing, it's got to be one rule for all. You can't be, you can't chop and change it. But wasn't the fight strange as well?
It definitely was. It really was. I also think this cut may have affected Oliveira a little bit during the fight. He didn't really seem to be fighting at 100%. We've seen Charles Oliveira take shots before, big shots. Cub's a different kind of dude, though, so it's really hard to tell whether or not it was just the sheer power that Cub Swanson puts out, or it was Charles being, kind of, I don't know if it was him being, him feeling weak from the cut, him maybe still being dehydrated at all, but I think on both sides, Charles came out flat, and Cub, who was the underdog, came out, looking really, really great. Ended it 2 minutes and 40 seconds into the first round, and we saw something you rarely see. Usually with a KO, someone connects and immediately, the guy completely falls down, loses balance, is knocked out. Cub jumped in, leapt in. I believe it was with a left hook, punched Charles, hopped back, was about to strike again, and then it took him about 2 or 3 seconds of standing there before he just, lights out, crumples down. Cub rushes in, but luckily the referee is able to stop the fight before there's too much damage. I'll start this one off with Patrick again, because Cub's your boy, but man, what was up with that fight, man?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, and I got to say real quick, I am glad to see the Ric Flair stutter step, fall on your face, knockdown, come back. It's been too long since we've seen that in combat sports, and always fun to watch. But Jake, like you said, I think it really was. It was just a perfect storm for Cub Swanson. Oliveira, he couldn't cut the weight. It makes it seem like he had a rough time with the cut. Who knows if there was some sort of injury that prevented him, or it could have just been one of those situations where you start cutting so much weight and start dehydrating yourself. Your organs can really fail on you, and you're not running as efficiently as you could be. So all these factors combined, Cub's on the hot streak, and he's been looking better in all areas of his game. So I think that was pretty much it, and Cub made himself look pretty good that night, and that was a very tough fight to call. This Oliveira, he's still a top prospect, still very good. He's moving up to the Brazilian John Jones title that Joe Rogan had labeled him when he first came into the UFC. But he's a young kid, and he's still got a lot, I think. I don't know about you guys.
I was just chuckling away to myself there. Like when you get the fighters in training and they talk about doing this, doing that, and they talk about getting their timing right, and obviously they're always on about the timing of throwing their strikes. I've never known someone get the timing right before him down. And he was, about 3 seconds out. You're supposed to, like Jake said, you're supposed to get hit and then fall down, or get hit. It was like watching the old pro wrestling. You get hit and then 3 seconds later you react. I think it was if I remember rightly, I'm sure he took a body shot before he took the punch to the head, and I'm sure it was the body shot that made him drop eventually. And obviously you do tend to get a delayed reaction with a body shot. I mean, we've seen it with Vitor Belfort as well. He got punched, I think it was, or kicked by Jones, and then dropped. So I think it was the body shot that dropped him, and I think that's what the delay was. But it did look odd, and I don't think it should have been KO of the night either. I thought, personally, that Seth Brzezinski should have won KO of the night.
That was a beautiful KO by Brzezinski, correct, and Me and Jake were watching this fight, and I just, man, there was something fishy about it. I mean, just like you guys brought up, there's just something very strange about that, knockout. Because what happened was he got hit with a left hook to the body, then stuttered back, and he looked fine, and then got hit with a massive right hand to the temple, and then stood back, and then squinted and fell down. But it didn't seem like his legs gave out. It seemed like he just sat down. Like he'd had enough. I think that's what happened. The body shot, plus being wobbled by that temple shot, I think, that was just what sealed the deal. And as far as future opponents for Mr. Swanson, I would have to say Ricardo Lamas. They're both on a 3-fight win streak, mostly by dominations. Cub has been more of a finisher, whereas Lamas has 2 finishes in his last 3, and I think that would be a great stylistic matchup because, I mean, those guys bring fireworks every time. What do you guys think?
I couldn't agree more. And the thing I think was perhaps a little fishy about it, we've seen guys like they'll just get a brutal spinning body kick to the liver and fall down, and it looks natural. It looks like they're falling down because they literally can't stand up anymore. I think it maybe was just Charles Oliveira giving up, which it's not a knock to him. Probably 90% of the fighters out there getting a 1-2 to the body, face like that would have fallen over or given up too. But it almost looked like Oliveira was willfully almost just submitting to his strikes because he got hit so hard. I really agree with you, Chris, as far as the way it looked like he was falling down. It looked like he was almost trying to catch himself, and he was sitting down to an extent. But as far as a future opponent, I really couldn't agree more. He's now up there in the elite of featherweights contending for the title in the UFC. I think it's Seaver, Lamas, Mendez, and Swanson, and those are the four guys now knocking at Jose Aldo's door at 145 pounds. And whether he fights Lamas or Mendez next, I don't know if Mendez has a fight scheduled. I know Seaver is scheduled to fight Eddie Yeagan at UFC 154, I believe. But he's knocking on that championship door, and I don't know how the UFC would necessarily market Aldo Swanson 2. Other than the fact that Swanson probably really wants revenge, because the first time they matched up in the WEC, it wasn't exactly a barn burner. I think the official time was 8 seconds.
Yes, that's not done. Literally, you had no time to do anything but watch 8 seconds of a fight.
Who do you think Cub gets next, Ray?
Well, just going back about you were saying about all the people that are contenders, I think you've got to throw, I know he's just dropping down, but you've got to throw Frankie Edgar in there, and you've also got to throw Korean Zombie in there, because Korean Zombie has looked phenomenal his last few fights. As for who Cub gets next, it's got to be one. There's obviously a list of contenders up near the top. You mentioned a few names, and the names I've just chucked in. I mean, you can mix and match any of those guys, to be honest with you. The top of the featherweight division is just so exciting. There's some amazing fighters up there. I'd be happy to see him fight over him. He's certainly a contender. I wanted to go back to what you were saying as well about Oliveira. Now, Oliveira is a strange fighter, because when he's on it and when he's fighting people that are just a little bit below his level, he wins, and he wins impressively, and he looks good. But we've seen him wilt now on a few occasions where he just seems to crumble and give up. We saw it against Jim Miller. We saw it against Old Cerrone. In the strangest fashion, we saw it against Cub Swanson. So he obviously just can't get up to that next level of competition, because he goes from looking great to looking awful in, like, I don't know, it just seems to be within one match. It just goes from being, the bee's knees, if you like, and then he just can't put two things together on his next fight.
I agree 100%, Ray. It seems, who knows, maybe if it's the mental aspect of the game that Oliveira needs to work on, because like you said, he has those flashes of brilliance, and especially in his first couple fights in the UFC, and he had 2 wins in a row after dropping to after dropping to featherweight. He's 2-1 at 145 right now, and he had the calf slicer submission on Eric Wisely, which is the first time that's happened in the UFC, but. And I kind of want to go back and touch on what Jake and Chris, I think you guys had alluded to with, just that it looks like he kind of gave up in the sense that, not to insinuate that the fight was fixed or anything like that, but at a certain point, if a fighter takes a couple shots and they're really hurt, they might just go down and, pull a Bob Sapp and, just fold and tap the strikes when they're not even being hit, just, again, not to insinuate a fix or anything like that, but I think, we saw something similar in Alan Belcher's return fight against Jason McDonald at Battle on the Bayou, and Belcher came out and, he just destroyed Jason McDonald, and he hit him with a punch, and to me it looked like he just went down just because he was like, oh man, I'm getting beat up and I don't want to get knocked completely unconscious again. So he just kind of gave up and, just saved himself from any further damage. And of course, if he had a good position, if he were in, top control on the ground, of course, he's not going to be quitting like that. Now, as far as Cub Swanson's upcoming opponents, I think you guys had a really great list of names going there. I do like Ricardo Lamas for him as an opponent, but I just would kind of hesitate for them to make that match because they already did fight at the first UFC on Fox card back last November. It was a good fight. I think Ricardo Lamas won that. It was like a second-round submission.
I forgot about that. Yeah, that was an arm triangle. Yeah. I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, it was a very close fight, very exciting, and I'm sure that rematch, that's got to happen again. I'd imagine, but I'd like to see him against a Korean Zombie or Chad Mendes. That's a spectacular fight. I think it's just another step up for Cub, and I think that it's a step up for Chad as well. Considering, of course he fought Jose Aldo. But he's just coming off a fight with Cody McKenzie, so I think fighting Cub would be a good and appropriate jump in competition. It'd be an exciting fight, good stylistically, and it would definitely help put both fighters where they want to be.
Yeah, and Mendes and Swanson have fought already, I believe. They fought in the WEC. It was near the end of the WEC's run, where Mendes just dominated with wrestling. So I think the Korean Zombie is probably the best matchup to make, considering, they're on some impressive win streaks and they haven't fought yet. As far as, talking about contenders and featherweight, I just want to end this, this fight saying that that's what makes Frankie Edgar so intriguing against Jose Aldo is he's never been stopped, and he will never stop fighting. He's a little Terminator, and that's the difference between him and some of these other guys like Charles Oliveira, who seem to find a way out. Frankie, there is no way out for that guy. He's just gonna truck on, and I think ultimately, as far as featherweight contenders go, Frankie Edgar is the perfect fight for Jose Aldo.
Just wanted to throw out there as well, talking about opponents for Cub. Obviously, we're on about styles, and he didn't fare well, like we said, against the two fighters you said, Mendes and Lamas. I think, again, the style didn't go against it. But, put him in against another stand-up fighter, and if you've got the winner of Dennis Seaver and Eddie Yagin, I think either of them two facing Cub would be a good fight, because they're going to stand and bang for 15 minutes or till someone goes down. So I think that would be good to watch as well.
Definitely.
I agree with that.
Definitely, and it's a pretty interesting looking at Cub's record. His last three losses are to the current cream of the crop of the featherweight division. He lost to Aldo in 2009. He lost to Chad Mendes at WEC 50 in 2010, and of course, like we were talking about, he lost to Ricardo Lamas last November on the first Fox card. So it'll really be interesting. I like the propositions of Chan Sung Jung and the winner of Seaver Yagin, just because those are fresh opponents. But at the same exact time, Seaver Yagin don't fight until December, so we don't know how much damage the winner of that's going to take, and whether he'll be on the shelf until the beginning of 2013. And Cub looks good. Cub looks absolutely ready to take over and move up the featherweight division. Eric Koch, another dude who is looking good and is at the top of the featherweight division. Definitely the featherweights are the strongest of the three new divisions, the 125, 135, and 145 divisions in the UFC. But moving on to the next fight, probably the fight we'll need to spend the least amount of time talking about. We got Matt Hamill and Roger Hollett. If you listened to last week's episode of the MMA Podcast, you heard us break that down, and it pretty much went the way we all figured it would. Hamill was pretty much gifted this fight. Definitely a stronger caliber fighter than Roger Hollett. Definitely a much better wrestler, and he kind of just imposed his will. two judges had it 30-27, one had it 29-28, probably because the second round was a little closer than the opening and closing stanzas. But I think it almost got finished at the end of the first round with Hamill just ragdolling him down, grinding away. Round 2 had a bit more stand-up, but round 3 it was back to just, Hamill bullying him, taking him down. I think he worked his way into half guard toward the end of that fight. And we'll probably only need to go around the round table once or twice for this fight, as it was probably the least compelling fight stylistic-wise on the card. But, what did you guys think of Hamill versus Hollett? I'll pass it to you first, Chris.
Oh, sorry, I just woke up. What was that? Were we talking about Hamill versus Hollett?
We were, actually. What did you think of that one?
I did not like that fight at all. That was definitely the worst card on the main card, or the worst fight on the main card. I felt that it was tedious, and we actually made a joke about that on the MMA podcast about how it would be a clinch fest, and just a lot of positional grappling for the first 2 or 3 rounds, and that kind of turned out to be right. And as far as Matt Hamill coming back into the UFC, it's nice to see him back, but he doesn't seem to have actually corrected any of those issues that we talked about. His hands were at his waist. He was plodding and slow. He could get any takedown he wanted, but I haven't seen any evolution in his skills since he's been gone. So who knows where he goes from here.
Yeah, spot on, Chris. He didn't make those improvements and tune anything up really that I noticed that we talked about last week. And he, at least to me, he looked healed up. He looked like he was in good shape. He looked real solid in there at light heavyweight. But I'm really glad you guys also brought up round 1 of that fight, because I don't think I've seen someone take that many unanswered shots on the ground since Brock Lesnar fought Shane Carwin. I mean, I know he was just turtling up, essentially, to me. That's what I saw. I saw Matt Hamill just pounding away on his face, and Josh Rosenthal just, standing there looking at Lord knows what. It should have been stopped, for the sake of Hollett, even though he wasn't taking too much damage. But at the same time, you can't take punches to the face for a minute and a half and, have the fight go on. That's just, at least in my opinion, that's not what I like to see. It should have been stopped. You just can't offer absolutely nothing like that, like Hollett did. And, if not making the wrong move for Hollett's sake, I think Josh Rosenthal just kind of screwed the fans, because then we had to see 2 more rounds of that fight.
I'm going to jump in there really quick before Ray takes over. I actually believe it was Dan Miragliotta reffing that fight. Just to
you're right. You're right. My mistake.
Miragliotta. Just to be a D-bag and I correct you, I think it was Miragliotta.
No, you know what? I believe you're absolutely right, and let's put the blame where the blame is due, at least where I think it's fit. And that was just a joke crew. I mean, they had Miragliotta, they had Rosenthal. I'm surprised they didn't have either of the Yamasakis in there. I did not like that officiating crew.
Going back to the Hamill fight, when I was watching that first round when he was hammering on on his head, because obviously some of those shots were going to the back of his head. Now normally the ref will shout at the fighter what's the back of the head, which you can't do with Matt Hamill, because obviously we all know he's deaf. But the other thing that the ref can't do is he can't. Because what he needed Hamill to do, he needed Hamill to lip read, but he can't touch his arm, so he can look at him, because if he touches him, then he thinks the fight's over. But I think a lot of those shots were going to the back of the head, and I think if that had been somebody who was hearing, he would have been being shouted at a lot more, and he maybe even lost a point. I mean, we've seen Eric Silva lose a point, or he got DQ'd when he was landing so many shots to the back of the head. But yeah, I could see that fight being stopped at the end of round 1. But Hamill did what he needed to do. I mean, it was his first fight back. He hasn't fought in a long time. he didn't look great, but he won his fight. His wrestling looked good, and a lot of time when he was fighting before, he didn't always use his wrestling. He used to stand and strike regardless of who he was up against. So it was good to see him. It was good to see him use his wrestling because his wrestling is a good weapon. But I personally was glad to see him back. I've always liked watching Matt Hamill fight, so I hope he gets another good little run to him. I mean, he'll never be a title contender, but I do like watching him fight. Definitely.
He'll even though he's not exactly the most crisp fighter standing up, I think he's definitely at least a gatekeeper. I also agree that he probably won't be fighting for title contendership anytime soon. But before we move along to Bisping versus Brian Stann, let's go around real quick and say who we think Hamill deserves next. Obviously, he needs a steep ramp up in the competition after Roger Holay. And I actually like the Canadian robot, Ryan Jimmo. Just came off a stunning, I think it was a 7-second knockout against Anthony Perosh at UFC 149. Rushed in there, tied the record for, I think it's tied with 2 other fights for fastest knockout in UFC history. But I think Jimmo versus Hamill would be a decent test for both fighters. Chris?
That's a pretty solid choice, man. I'm trying to think of guys out there who are on a similar streak and would make a compelling fight. I think Jimmo's very well-rounded and would be a stiff test. Other than that, I can't really think of anyone at light heavyweight that's on a 1-fight win streak except for a man named Shogun, and he's already tied up in another fight. So I think that's perfect.
You're on about 1-fight win streaks. We've got a guy we've already talked about. You've got Vinny Magalhaes. That fight makes a lot of sense as well. Vinny versus Matt Hamill. They're both coming back after a long layoff from the UFC. They both were. I mean, okay, Hamill didn't look as impressive as what Vinny did, but Hamill was fighting higher up the card. I'd be happy to see Hamill fight Chris Jimmo or see him fight Vinny Magalhaes. I think they're both be good fights. Patrick?
Yeah, I think those are really good suggestions too. And I'm having a hard time trying to think of good fights for these guys, and I don't know if that's just my fault, my recollection being off, or if that kind of speaks to the light heavyweight division as it stands right now. But for Hamill, yeah, I think Magalhaes would be good. I think that Hamill would definitely test his standout, or he would test out his stand-up. So, yeah, I think that's a good move.
Yeah, and I guess in the upcoming months, kind of like I said with the Magalhaes fight, we'll see who Joe Silva decides he gets next. But he definitely is in that range of, sort of 1 or 2 steps away from title contendership. He, James Tehuna, like we were talking about before, Vinny Magalhaes. I guess you probably could throw Stephan Bonner in there, who's somehow currently scheduled to go up against the best fighter in the world, Anderson Silva. Don't really know how that happened. But, these are a crop of guys that whoever we see come out of the next couple fights with W's will probably see fight a big name, whether it's a Shogun or a Rashad if he decides to stay in the division, Ryan Bader. There are a ton of guys in that, second-tier spot. You have, Henderson, Machida, Evans, Shogun, Bader, Jackson, Griffin, Gustafson, Teixeira, I guess you would throw up there. And we will see how that plays in the next few months, Ray.
I just want to make a quick point. You've made me think of it because you mentioned about Bonner and Silva. Now, for me, there's been a couple of fights lately that have both been, on paper, have been huge mismatches, which was the Shogun versus Brandon Vera fight, and obviously the fight we've had this weekend, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Now, both those fights turned out to be epic fights, so maybe we'll get the same with Anderson Silva and Stephan Bonner, because I don't think any of us expected Vera Shogun to be the fight it was, and I don't think any of us expected Jones Abrador to be the fight that it was, so maybe we're in for another treat.
I would love to see Bonner pull off a first-round flying armbar on Silva. That would probably surpass Sarah St. Pierre as the biggest WTF moment in UFC history. But, when it was kind of funny, I think it was the 13th episode we found out live during the podcast what that Silva and Bonner were matched up, and we even broke the news to Miesha Tate and asked her what she thought about the matchup. But one thing that really goes hard in Bonner's favor is he has iron chin. He has an indomitable will. When John Jones first entered the UFC and was destroying everyone, he took John Jones the full 15 minutes. And I believe I'm going to check now and make sure that I am correct on it, but I believe he may have taken one of those rounds. I'm not sure.
Third round.
Third round, yeah. He took a round against John Jones. This is a guy you never really know what you're going to get with him. Coming off 3 wins, iron will, and we'll definitely save it for another roundtable, but that definitely will be a compelling matchup. But, let's move on to those 3 main fights, which I think, Bisping, Stan, and the flyweight and light heavyweight championship are really what MMA fans tuned in for. The 3 big fights. Most fights we'll see 2 major matches on a card, but thanks to UFC 151 getting canceled in part, John Jones was moved up. Bisping, Stan moved down from the co-main. Johnson, Benavidez moved down from the main. And, we had Michael Bisping, the consummate bad guy, against Brian Stan, the consummate good guy. And unlike a lot of the cards, this was an upset-laden card. There were a ton of upsets, from Swanson to Magalhaes. Brimage upset a up-and-coming Jimmy Hetz. But, Bisping, at least in this fight, did what everyone expected him to do and took it 29-28 across the board. Stan definitely had his moments. There was one key moment in the first round, I think, where Stan blasted Bisping with a right, and you really could tell for a few seconds there Bisping was on roller skates. But really, got back in the fight and dominated like he needed to in that. I think, like I mentioned before, the first round up in the air. I actually gave the first round a 10-10, was going to give it a 10-9 Bisping, but that moment at the very end where Stan just blasted him kind of changed it to a draw. But Bisping roared back, took the second and the third round, and they had a nice big hug in the middle of the ring, which was pretty nice to see after those intense stare downs. That was pretty scary. But you have the top fighter in the UK winning his middleweight match, so we'll we'll pass it over to our UK pundit, Ray Thompson.
Bisping, I thought he looked brilliant. I was so pleased. I was cheering him on. I'll tell you what else I liked as well was his wrestling. His takedowns looked really good. I mean, he got stand up quite a few times and literally picked him up quite high and slammed him down. I think Bisping was expected to win, but we all know that Stan is tough and Stan can punch, and we've seen Bisping get rocked before. Obviously, Henderson knocked him out, and Vanderlei put him on thin ice as well for a little bit in their fight. But I was so pleased to see Bisping get the win. And hopefully we'll go back round again in a minute and talk about who next for Bisping. But I've got some good ideas as well who I want to see Bisping fight. So I'll let other people talk about the fight, then we'll come back to that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ray. I think Bisping's wrestling was really the highlight of that match. I think that fight really played out a lot like we had all expected, and we kind of alluded to it on the MMA podcast last week. Bisping looked real good, albeit that one punch that Jake had referenced in the first round. Bisping really did a good job. His footwork was on point. He was moving away from Brian Stan's power hand. He was using the speed, and he mixed up a lot of great shots. Aside from that one shot, I think Bisping really took the fight on the feet. And like Ray said, those takedowns, I thought if Bisping got into a little trouble, he might want to get a takedown. But I did not think he would come with those. I thought they were fairly emphatic, just really good slams. Those will knock the wind out of you. So I really like what I saw out of Michael Bisping. And Chris, what did you think?
Well, gentlemen, I have a very deep diatribe I'm about to dive into here.
Let's hear it.
So
Rant
Ray,
on, brother.
First off, Ray, I want to say that I know you like Bisping, so I just want to warn you, maybe put the muffs on, not listen to this part. But
earmuffs, Ray.
I've never liked Michael Bisping as a person, and up until about 2 years ago, I didn't even like him as a fighter. When he fought Matt Hamill at UFC 75, he was gifted a decision. I think Hamill won that fight. Even Bisping's hometown crowd was booing him. It doesn't matter, though. Those were the judges. Who cares? And then he fought Rashad Evans and did very well in that fight. But in my opinion, that was a boring fight, and I blame both those guys. Drops down to middleweight, beats Charles McCarthy and Jason Day by complete dominations. I was like, okay, Bisping has some skills at 185. This looks a little more natural. Then he fights Chris Lieben, and, I love Lieben, so it was just one of those kind of sad moments to see Lieben get beat up. So obviously my ego's getting in the way. And then he gets knocked out by Dan Henderson, and I loved it after seeing him talk shit for the entire season of The Ultimate Fighter. To get dominated like that was awesome, but there was a turn. After that fight, he was brutally honest and said, man, I don't really have much to say. I got knocked out. I need to work on my skills. And ever since then, I have grown to like Michael Bisping somehow. Like day by day, I just like him a lot more. He dominated Dennis Kang. He lost a fight to Wanderlei Silva that he shouldn't have lost, and has since then has looked like a man on fire. I mean, Chael Sonnen couldn't keep him down. That is very, very, very impressive, and it's just one of those things where it's nice to kind of look back at my previous thoughts about the guy and say, you know what, I was wrong, man. Like, just because he's brash and cocky doesn't mean anything. Ultimately, we watch this sport for fights, and who cares what goes on outside the ring. Inside the ring, he is a amazing mixed martial artist, and he proved it against Stan. That fight was pretty decent. I wasn't really too high on the fight, but I think that Michael Bisping has proven in the last couple fights that he is just a very good fighter, and I would love to see him face Chris Weidman after Weidman destroys Tim Boesch.
Definitely. I would say the same exact thing, but almost the same exact reason why I wouldn't match Swanson up against the winner of I can't even remember the fight now. Oh yeah, the winner of Seaver versus Yagan. Boesch and Weidman aren't going to be fighting until UFC 155, and that isn't until the very end of the year. And I don't, and like I mentioned before, who knows if the winner's going to have a broken hand, a broken foot, is going to be on the shelf for another 4 or 5 months after that. Bisping really is, as far as I take into account a lot of my colleagues' opinions on where people stand in a division, and I have not seen such a big margin when it comes down to where people put Bisping. He was asking for a fight, even a title fight rather, even before his fight against Brian Stann. And although I also think he won that fight against Chael Sonnen, I gave the nod 48-47 to Michael Bisping in that fight. But the fact is he lost, and it was really close. And when judges rule it a loss in a close fight, a Pacquiao Bradley type loss, I don't even take into account. But a close fight, a loss is a loss, and unfortunately before that loss, he did have 4 wins in a row, I believe, against Mayhem, Rivera, Sexyama, and Dan Miller. None of those 4 guys are guys I would even put in my top 25 middleweights. That win against Brian Stann, very impressive, definitely puts him in the top 10 for me, but it puts him in the very fringe of the top 10, maybe 9th, maybe 10th. I do think he is either 1 or 2 fights away from a title shot against Anderson Silva, and his mouth is definitely going to help that out. Also, just the way it helps out Sonnen. But I would really like to see him take on a guy. I'm thinking of who is available, but Boesch and Weidman are tied up until the end of the year, and maybe longer if either are injured. The same exact thing goes for Belcher and Yushin Okami. They both fight at UFC 155 as well. I believe the only top middleweights in the UFC who aren't tied up now is Jake Shields and Vitor Belfort, and Belfort's obviously coming off this loss, and he's pretty banged up. I don't know if he has any broken bones, but he looked like a fish at the press conference, as Chris told me. But maybe I think Rockhold fights the beginning of November. Maybe if he gets a win and there's some way you can bring him into the UFC. But there's no one really that pops in my mind. It's a sort of a waiting game, which that probably is the synopsis of the entire middleweight division now. We don't know what Anderson Silva's plans are in the middleweight division. He's 37 years old. People thought he was going to move down and fight a welterweight before, and now people are thinking that he's going to move up. Or now we know he's going to move up and fight Stephan Bonner. So who has any idea whether Silva stays at 205 to fight John Jones? What exactly happens there? Sonnen's obviously moved up to 205 pounds as well. So it'll really be interesting to see what happens. And unless he's scheduled against a guy like Jake Shields or Vitor Belfort, it's going to be up until early next year until we hear who Bisping fights next. Because I really do honestly believe, even though he's such a bad guy and so many guys don't like him, the UFC wants to move him up and wants to put him in the position to fight for a title just because he can run his mouth so well, right?
Yeah.
I think I may have put Ray to sleep with that rant.
Ray!
I think Patrick wants to jump in, then I'll jump in after Patrick. What was you going to say, Patrick?
I was just going to bring up a point about Michael Bisping, and that one of his more admirable traits, depending on, where you sit as far as Michael Bisping as a personality. I like Bisping. I think every American got a little irritated with that season of The Ultimate Fighter, but before that I was a big fan, and I'm a big fan after that. And one of the things that I am such a fan of is the fact he's an active fighter. His fight with Jason Miller came last December. Then he fought Chael in January, Stan in September. So he's got about 3 fights in the span of less than a calendar year. And that's what I like to see, especially in the UFC. I like to see these guys being active, and those are the guys I really root for. Your Dan Millers or your Jim Millers, or even your Josh Koscheck's. My one thing about Josh Koscheck, he annoys the piss out of me, but God damn it, he will fight just about anyone, anytime, and that's the kind of guy I like.
Going back to what you were saying about Bisping. Another name. I was going to say, but I've always been a big fan of Bisping. I remember watching Bisping fight before he made it in the UFC, and I've always been a fan. There's only one time I didn't like what he did, which I don't mind all the talking. I don't mind people talking. What I don't like is when people talk and can't back it up, and obviously Bisping's always backed it up. The only thing I didn't like was when he faced Jorge Rivera, and he took what Rivera was doing in the build-up was actually quite funny, and he took offence. And the spitting thing, I didn't like that. I thought that was uncalled for. But apart from that, I've always liked Michael Bisping. But just another name to throw out there. You were listing off the names of people who he could fight. Another name to throw out there. Now the guy's he's top ranked, but he lost his debut. But another name's Hector Lombard. He's quite a highly ranked fighter. He'd be a good matchup for Bisping. Balfour's got a broken hand apparently, so I don't think he'll be fighting anytime soon. The other thing I was going to say was, personally, the next fight I'd like to see, and I understand what Jake was saying and where it's come from, but I'd like to see him face the winner of Chris Weidman and Tim Boetsch. I think that's the most logical fight for Bisping, because they're the top guys now at the top of the division who are next in line. Now, there's talks of Anderson Silva staying at 205. So if Anderson Silva stays at 205, they should make that either for an interim title or for the actual title. If Anderson Silva's going to come back down to 185, which hopefully he will, then he should face the winner of the Weidman, Boetsch, Bisping triangle. That's what I'd like to see. Chris?
Yeah, fantastic, man. Something that the UFC does is that they like to protect their contenders, which makes sense. You don't want to take two people who have incredible win streaks and pit them against each other, because then someone goes to the back of the line. So you like to match up these top-ranked contenders with people who are somewhat similar but not identical, so that they can get another solid win, and then that right there will dignify a title shot. So it's one of those things. It's like a parallel to boxing. Do you want to make the fights that make sense, or do you want to make the fights that people want to see, or do you want to make the fights that make sense to your roster? And those are the questions that go into it. So as far as what makes sense to me as a fan and, as someone who thinks about it all the time, I think that Bisping versus the winner of that fight between Weidman and Bosch, it has to happen. Anderson Silva, at this point in his career, he's 37 years old. He's untouchable. And the only thing that makes fight to him, the only fights that make sense to him are big money fights, money fights, and that work well with his legacy. So only time will tell. We can just speculate all day long, but he's getting old. He's getting up there, and ultimately people want to see him versus Jones, which will never happen, I don't think, or him versus GSP, which it seems that might actually happen. So I think everyone at middleweight is kind of on standstill, and that's why we're probably going to see some of these matchups between top-ranked middleweights.
I definitely agree there, and the only place I would disagree with you, I actually think we could see Anderson Silva, John Jones in the next year or two, and the only reason I say that, up before the whole UFC 151 debacle, they had never said a single negative thing about each other, but when Jones turned down the fight and effectively got UFC 151 canceled, Anderson Silva came out and made remarks against John Jones, said things like that was something he never would have done, he never would have let a fight get canceled, and took it as far to say that he'd be rooting for Vitor Belfort, a former, rival, a former nemesis of his. So, he came out and spoke out against Jones, and I'm hoping, my fingers crossed, that we end up seeing Anderson and Jones fight, because Anderson-Jones, I think more people would agree, is a bit of a more compelling matchup, even though there's a bigger disadvantage when it comes to size. Jones is just a monster. It's the most technical, most accurate striker of all time against one of the most technical, one of the most accurate, but still young. He's still green somewhat, and that would be an excellent fight of just student versus the master, and I think that would be something we'd all love to eventually see. But anyone have anything else before we move on to the two championship fights?
I love ice cream.
I'm ready to move on.
Chris?
Nope. Go for it.
He loves ice cream.
No,
I love
Chris,
ice cream.
Yeah, Chris loves ice cream.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to the championship fights of UFC 152, and then put a bow on our inaugural podcast. We had Demetrius Johnson beat Joseph Benavidez. It was a close fight, but I think most people thought that Johnson was the victor. Looked better standing up, which was something we all maybe could have seen, but he looked better wrestling too, which was extremely surprising. Joseph Benavidez is known for his top level wrestling, and Johnson had a couple of slams where he took Benavidez down, and we'll talk about the fight first, obviously, like we've been doing, but the question kind of remains. The flyweight division is so thin, there's not really any obvious title contender here. First we'll talk about the fight. I actually had it 49-46 Johnson. It was a split decision. Two different judges had it going 48-47 for either fighter, and then the third one had it 49-46 for Johnson, like I did. But what did you think about that P Money? I stuttered. I was gonna say Patrick, then I was gonna say P Money, then I changed my mind to Patrick, then I changed my mind to P Money again.
Please call me P Money.
P Money.
I thought the fight was it was really good. I don't know if some of the Canadian fans maybe didn't agree. I talked to some of my friends who were more casual fans who saw the fight. Some of them apparently weren't into it. I don't know how. It was a good back and forth fight. I mean, I guess sometimes people just want to see finishes. And I thought that was just a very close fight. I'll be honest. I had a couple beers. It was a 12-fight card. By the time that 11th fight came on, I had a couple. But before all that, I mean, I knew this was just going to be a tough fight to judge. And I'm sure everyone else on the panel with me and everybody listening would agree. These 125ers, they're moving a million miles a minute. It's nonstop. It's super technical. And to be very honest, I literally have no idea how to judge this fight. I need to watch it again, but honestly, I could have had it going either way. I had it 10-10 first round, 10-9 Benavidez in the second, Mighty Mouse with the third, Joe with the fourth, and Mighty Mouse with the fifth. So I had it as a draw. I could see the first round going for Joe or going for Mighty Mouse, giving either the win. So again, I just need to watch that fight again. I really don't know what I could say more about it, but as far as the action itself goes, it was awesome. It was a great fight. Benavidez seemed to hit some of the better or more harder head strikes, but Johnson had some really good combos. He was really quick. He was in and out. He had some good knees to the body. Joe had mount. He had dominant position longer in the fight. I would like to point out, I think it was the fourth round where Joe had the mount. He was going for a triangle choke, and I want to say he was on top of Demetrius for anywhere from 1 to 2 minutes. And even though Demetrius, he had a lot of really good slams, but he could not keep Joe down. That's just one of the things to me that makes it so hard to score. Demetrius had the takedowns, but to me, Joe had more time spent in a dominant position. It looked to me like he hit the harder shots. But hey, as far as the action goes, I don't think anyone was really disappointed.
Yeah, that was a great fight. I mean, while it was going on, I know it sounds weird, but I had a couple friends over, and I decided to hit the pads with my buddy. I've got some Thai pads and 16-ounce gloves, so we were hitting the pads, and I'd look at it every now and then. I actually rewatched the fight today, and what it made me think of is an interaction I had on Facebook with this guy. Some girl that I know said that she was watching the UFC, and it was a Dominic Cruz fight. I think he was fighting Demetrius Johnson, actually. And some dude commented on there, some big fat football player was like, "Dude, I hate these little guys, man. All they do is dance around." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? It's some of the most exciting, just all over the place fights. You have scrambles, you have submission attempts, you have striking, everything mixes together. When you have a heavyweight fight, yeah, it's going to be exciting for about 2 minutes, but once it goes past that, they're just sweating and, So I basically, it just goes back to this old thought that I have that smaller guys, we're going to have lower finishing rates, but I really enjoy what they do because you get the full effect of MMA. You have all of the aspects. You got wrestling, judo, striking, and I think that Demetrius Johnson, I've kind of had a chip on my shoulder about that guy when he fought Ian McCall for the first time. I think it was in Australia. McCall looked over at the ref, and Johnson put his hands up like, "Oh, okay," and then punched McCall in the face. And since then, I've kind of had a little bit of disrespect for that guy. But what he proved after beating Joseph Benavidez is that he can hang with a guy who is just an amazing fighter. And I'd love to see Johnson versus John Dodson. I think that's probably what's going to come next. I know Dodson has a fight against Mayorga or whatever that guy's name is, some top 5 flyweight. So they're going to fight.
De Silva.
No, De Silva. Okay, Mayorga. My bad. Nowhere near that. But I can't wait to see that fight because I know that Dodson trains out of Jackson's, and I think that a fight between him and Johnson would be amazing. They're both explosive, and I can't wait.
Actually, before you jump in, Ray, he is also known by Jussier Formiga I don't know how you pronounce that, but yeah, he goes by both names somehow. I'm not really sure.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes me feel better.
That works out, but yeah, but Ray, what do you think about that flyweight fight?
Yeah, it was a good fight. I kind of agree with Patrick with the score, and I personally found it pretty much impossible to score. I mean, even that the fourth round when Benavidez was in the dominant position, at the end of the round, Johnson had turned it around, and he had some dominant positions as well. For me, I thought the round 4 was the most exciting round. I think the fourth round was brilliant. We had the near choke. You had John, when they actually got involved with some grappling, because a lot of the other rounds were just striking. But I think when they actually engaged with the grappling, I think that was much more exciting to watch. I think the flyweight division is really exciting. I know we've got maybe a little bit of a shortage of contenders, but that's going to sort itself out. We're going to get people coming through. That won't be a problem. I mean, there's still some good guys that aren't in the UFC yet, and me and Patrick spoke to a guy a few weeks back, Dustin Ortiz, and I'd love to see the UFC pick Dustin Ortiz up and give him a chance as well. I think he's going to be a future, a good contender for the flyweight division as well. So hopefully he'll get picked up. But yeah, I'm excited for the flyweight division, and I think I was surprised if we won the fight, but it was good to have a little bit of a twist and not always go to plan sometimes.
Definitely, and you mentioned that fourth round. I totally agree. It was the one round that was more grappling based, and it was actually the round that I gave to Joseph Benavidez. They kept it standing, and even though Joby One Kenobi is a great stand-up guy, he's not as good as Johnson. Johnson has excellent footwork and moved around beautifully and took that fight away from the heavy favorite in Benavidez. As far as the flyweight that division goes, I don't know if you all agree, but I think the number 2 and number 3 flyweights, at least in the UFC, are Joseph Benavidez and Ian McCall, and obviously both of them, their last fights were losses to Demetrius Johnson. I'd love to see them get paired up again. Both of them had close fights with Mighty Mouse, and I definitely think we'll see one, if not both of them, get a crack at the title in the next couple years. So I would love to see them fight each other, have Mighty Mouse fight someone else in the meantime, whether that's the winner of John Dodson and Jussier Da Silva, whether that's Chris Carrizo, whether it's I forget who you just mentioned, Ray, but usually I'm more interested in seeing who the winner of a fight gets after a fight, especially a title fight. But in this, I really want to see Ian McCall versus Joseph Benavidez, because both of them sort of lacked in the same department against Mighty Mouse. They had superior wrestling, and I think with a different game plan, either guy could beat Mighty Mouse, but Mighty Mouse was doing an amazing job at keeping it standing up and keeping it in his wheelhouse, so to speak. I'll pass the torch right back to you, Ray. Who do you think Mighty Mouse and Benavidez should get next?
Talking about Ian McCall, it's worth noting that the first time they fought, McCall and Johnson, Ian McCall actually out-wrestled Demetrius Johnson. I mean, he had him in full mount at one stage.
Significantly.
So, and you would think that Demetrius Johnson basically was able to out-wrestle Joseph Benavidez. So, I know MMA math doesn't always work, but that makes for a very interesting fight between Benavidez and McCall. I think that's a great shout. I'd love to see that fight. I think both of those guys are 2 and 3. I agree. But going into this fight, I had Benavidez as number 1, and obviously that's changed because he lost to Demetrius Johnson. As for regards to who does Johnson get next, I think Dodson's a good call. I also think one to look out for is Chris Carrizosa, because he's looked very good at bantamweight, had a really solid win over Mizugaki, and now I know it was a controversial win, but that's not Carrizosa's fault. Carrizosa was given the decision. It's not up to him to get the call right. All he does is go out and fight. And then he looked good when he dropped down. I think it was against Galdino. I think they had a really good fight. He looked really good in that fight. So yeah, I think Carrizosa's another guy to look out for at flyweight. Patrick?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on there, Ray. And I really like the Ian McCall Joseph Benavidez fight. My only hesitation in making that match would just be that with flyweight not being as fleshed as a lot of the other divisions, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, where would they go from there? Would the winner of McCall and Benavidez fight the winner of, let me backtrack a little bit. I mean, because Mighty Mouse has said that he's looking at the Hussier de Silva, Ian McCall fight. He's looking at the winner of that, I believe.
John Dodson, I think he's matched up against now.
Yeah, that's correct. The Dodson de Silva fight. He's looking at that for the for his first title defense. So it's one of those things. If you make McCall Benavidez, well, do they just automatically fight the winner of, whoever John Dodson versus, Demetrius Johnson or whatever the fight ends up being? Or would you make that fight and then say maybe have him take a step back and, not to slight anyone, but it's just kind of interesting with the lack of depth at that division. So yeah, hard for me to really make any fights. I'd like to see him pick up some more guys. Like Ray said, there's Dustin Ortiz out there who fought Ian McCall at Tachi Palace fights. There's Mamoru Yamaguchi, who's a very highly ranked flyweight. There's some guys out there that they should sign to flesh out the division. And, of course, we've got Sergio Pettis out of Rufus Sport. He's at 125.
Antonio Benuelos, Joshua Sampo.
Yeah, absolutely. So they need to make some more acquisitions, I think. But for the time being, I think Johnson should take the winner of Dodson versus Formiga. And as for Benavidez, I think there's some good matchups out there. Maybe a Chris Carriasso, like Ray had alluded to. I think that would be a nice matchup, and Carriasso certainly no pushover himself, so it'd be a competitive match as well.
I don't really have much to say beyond what we've talked about. I mean, I'm just going to extrapolate what you guys were talking about. 125 it's not necessarily shallow, but we don't know enough about any of the guys to make a call on good matches. And on top of that, casual fans won't give a shit about who they are because they won't really know them. So as far as, a fight after the Dodson-Mayorga winner, man, I have no idea. That's just one of those things where I pride myself in MMA knowledge, and I'm at a loss at the flyweight division.
Definitely. Anyone got anything to add in on the flyweight fight before we move to the main event?
I'm good.
All right, yeah, that was an amazing fight that led off UFC 152. John Jones was by far the biggest favorite on the entire card, which had a lot of people wondering why you would put the biggest mismatch on the top of the card. And Vitor came out there looking fierce. Everyone knew that Vitor would probably need to do something early, or else John Jones would eventually start to take Vitor down and grind him away, finish the fight in some fashion, whether by TKO or submission. And Vitor leapt on John Jones in the first minute of the round and brought the light heavyweight champion the closest he's come to losing in his entire career. Jones was a little sloppy there and gave up his arm to Vitor, who turned it into a flying armbar. He was literally hanging off of John Jones. Jones could not shake Vitor off. And we found out after the fight just how much damage that armbar did. He hung on there. Vitor said he actually heard a pop, which made him lay off a little bit. He broke a bone in his arm. It turned out there's probably some nerve damage in there as well. And one thing, we've never really seen John Jones in deep trouble. And the thing about that fight, he didn't let us know that he was in deep trouble. Whereas, I mean, I'm talking about the elite, the cream of the crop, the best fighters in the world. Most of them would probably be going through so much pain that they would, let it be seen, whether it was not landing rights or not landing lefts, whichever arm arms broken. I mean, immediately after getting out of the submission, Jones took Belfort down and was landing punishing strikes with both arms. Watching it, seeing Jones land those strikes, the first thing I thought is, all right, his arm is not damaged from the armbar. Came back, roared back, escaped the submission, won the first round by dominance, won the second round by dominance, third round by dominance, just taking him down and just having his way with Vitor Belfort. There was such a strength and a size advantage there. Jones is so long, he just grabs you and uses that leverage to literally toss you around. And less than a minute into the fourth round, took Vitor down like he had been the entire fight, moved his way into side control, and I believe during the fight play-by-play, Rogan and Goldie called it a Kimura, but it was actually a key lock, and that is how Jon Jones really survived. That's a good word to use it, because he was tested, and he was closer to losing than he has in his entire career, and somehow pulled up not just a decision, which if he wanted, he won the first 3 rounds easily. He could have sat back and not really tried that hard with his broken arm and let it go to a decision, but he finished the fight a minute into the 4th round. It was an impressive display, and I don't know about you all, but I was kind of on the Jon Jones hate bandwagon before this fight, and he kind of won me back over to being a fan of him. He showed tremendous poise and toughness there in the cage, and I'll pass it off to Chris to follow that up.
Man, what an incredible performance. And when I first saw the matchup, I was skeptical. I was like, really? A guy that hasn't fought in this division for years. Like, I don't know how long it's been. I think it's been 6 or 7 years. He's been at middleweight or catchweight. And, it's just one of those things. You go look at Vitor when he fought at middleweight against Rich Franklin. He had some flab on him, a little bit of flab. And then you cut to the Vitor that fought Jon Jones on Saturday night. Is it just me, before I get into my breakdown, is it just me or does Vitor look giant? He looked like the Hulk in there, dude. Did you guys notice that?
Yeah, during the weigh-in, it kind of surprised me. I don't think Vitor was really expecting to move up to 205 pounds up until less than a month before this last-minute fight was put together. So, guys training to a fight at 185 pounds. He weighed in at 205 on the dot, didn't weigh in a pound under 205, and the dude looked yoked. He put on a legitimate 20 pounds of muscle within, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and maybe he had been working up after the fight. But, Vitor looked like a monster during the weigh-ins. Ray?
Yeah, man. It was.
I'll
sorry, I didn't break the fight down.
No.
Basically, Jones. That armbar was amazing. I was, jumping out of my seat and just yelling, and then after that, it just went all downhill. It was like it shot up, and then it was at its highest peak, and then it went down into a plateau where it just slowly just went downhill for Vitor. He had some moments of brilliance. He landed a couple really nice head kicks, and he was mainly just standing in front of Jon Jones, which is obviously what Jon wants. He's going to use that range. He wasn't moving side to side. He didn't have any movement. Jon, he was landing stuff we haven't seen from him before, a lead leg side kick to the gut, which ended up dropping Vitor. Jones really impressed me with this fight, even if it wasn't the ideal opponent. At this point, there's really not too many guys out there to challenge him. I mean, if you look at it, you've got Machida, who's on a 1-fight win streak. You've got Shogun on a 1-fight win streak. You have Gustafsson, who's fighting Shogun, and Dan Henderson's injured. So there's definitely a lack of depth right now at 205 that can actually challenge him. So we'll see what happens in the future, and it was nice to see an exciting main event where instead of seeing a 1 or 2 round steamrolling, there was some moments of brilliance by Mr. Belfort. I liked it.
The thing that impressed me most about Belfort in that fight was the heart he showed, because we've seen in the past again with Belfort where sometimes he crumbles against his opponents, sometimes, But the amount of punishment that took. I mean, even when he was losing, he was always in the fight. You always felt he could land, he could do something. I mean, the armbar attempt was fantastic. I mean, he was close to having that armbar. But yeah, and even like when he took that body shot as well, and he had the delayed reaction and he dropped to recover. He didn't drop to pull out the fight. He obviously knew he needed to hit the ground to recover from that body shot. I mean, I've never been hit like that, so I don't know how that feels. But when you see someone like Balfour drop, it must hurt. But he was still in the fight, recovered, and he got himself back into the fight again. And I know sometimes he pulled guard a little bit as well, but it came out afterwards that Balfour had a broken hand going into that fight. And obviously, after nearly getting the armbar, he obviously felt that was the best way that he could, he could win. But yeah, I mean, I've always liked John Jones. I know he gets a lot of bad press. I didn't like the fact the event was cancelled. I thought he should have took that fight. I didn't agree with that decision. But as a fighter, I've always enjoyed watching him fight because he's exciting to watch. I love his takedowns. I love his spinning stuff he throws. But yeah, for me, what the biggest thing that came out of that fight was the heart of Balfour. And I can't wait to see what happens next with Balfour, whether he stays at 205 or he drops back down to 185. Once his hand's recovered, he's another guy that's up near the top. I mean, we're talking about Bisping earlier on. How exciting is the Balfour versus Bisping matchup? That'd be good on paper as well. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what Balfour does. As for Jones, it's hard to know who he goes up against next because he is so good. We've had the same problem in quite a lot of the weight classes where they've got guys underneath them that are good, but the champion looks so good, so it's hard to match him. We've had the same with John Jones, Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, Jose Aldo. They all look that much better than the rest of the division. It's hard to know who to put up against, but whoever he fights, it's going to be good. It's going to be exciting. He finishes fights, which is great. I mean, he's finished people that don't get finished. Shogun is hardly ever finished. Machida, I don't think I've ever seen Machida finish. So, regardless, it's great to see him fight because he finishes fights. It's exciting. So I don't know what's next for Jones, but either way, I'm excited. Is Patrick next?
Yeah, I'm up next, Ray, and I agree with you guys 100%. It was just it was an amazing showing from Belfort, and I think pretty much everyone thought that this was just going to go John Jones' way and just be a cakewalk, and I know that's absolutely what I thought. And Belfort came out, and he came out hungry, and he came out to prove why he was a legend, and he certainly did, putting John Jones in the worst position he's ever been in his whole career. It was a very interesting second and third and fourth rounds. To me, I don't know what you guys thought, but I almost felt like John Jones, he wanted that, I believe it was an Americana. I'd have to go back and rewatch that fight.
No, but, it was correct. That was it.
Okay, I did not want to get my Kimuras and my Americanas mixed up and look like more of a fool than I already do.
Attaboy.
But yes, I know something. But it looked to me like he wanted a little revenge for the armbar that Vitor put on him, and I thought in the fourth round when he had him in the salivary position, the crucifix, I thought it was going to be a repeat of the Vladimir Matyushenko or Brandon Vera fight, or what he'd been doing to Vitor Belfort for the previous three rounds, and that was just destroying him with those text mark elbows. And it looked like he got a little revenge submission, and Vitor was very quick to tap on that one. And I think that's probably what impressed me the most, especially coming off of John Jones's technical submission over Lyoto Machida, where he just choked him unconscious with a standing guillotine. That's one of the most impressive things I've seen, is just his game and what he's been able to do with the submissions now, as well as his striking. And I think, what we saw from Vitor is that something I've kind of been thinking is that, John Jones, his length is his weapon, as well as, his incredible skill set, and, he's a very smart fighter. But I think that if anyone's going to beat him, they're going to have to use those long limbs against him, like a Machida catching and missing with some good timing, or Vitor Belfort latching onto that armbar and, trying to take those long limbs in the wrong direction. I think that's really what we're going to have to see if anyone wants to stand a chance against John Jones. And as far as who's next for Jones, it would, if it wanted to be competitive, I think it would have to be against either a Machida or, perhaps a Gustafsson, simply because of his length. He's a similar build. He's 6'5". Jones is 6'4", potentially 6'5". The reach is fairly similar, about as similar as it's going to get when you're trying to find someone with a build like John Jones. So, who knows what's next for him. Dana White's referenced that Machida and Dan Henderson may need another fight before they get their title shots. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And as far as Vitor Belfort, Chris, like you had touched on, he looked like a beast. And, I think maybe that's just, that's Vitor. He's basically just walking around at that weight. I think, that's a non-dehydrated Vitor coming in just looking jacked up. And it'll be really interesting to see if he goes back down to 185 or if he stays at 205. And I don't think I've seen anything indicating either way in the past couple of days as far as what Vitor is going to do. But I'd definitely be excited. I think there might even be some more entertaining fights at light heavyweight than there is for him at middleweight. So I'm definitely eager to see what's next for both of these fighters.
Yeah, man. Vitor, started his career as a heavyweight, 230 pounds, just wrecked everyone. They called him the Phenom. And let's do some MMA math. John Jones is a more methodical fighter. Beat Vitor up and ended up getting a finish, whereas Anderson Silva had this crazy front kick knockout that still blows my mind. Looking forward to the potential John Jones-Anderson Silva fight, what I noticed in this fight, John Jones pulled the Anderson Silva off at one point in, I think it was the third or fourth round. Vitor was just standing there, not doing anything, just flinching every couple seconds, and John Jones just put his hands at his waist and pumped his chest at Vitor. I was like, that's Anderson Silva. That is Anderson Silva. So it's just incredible to me to think that if they fought, I mean, it's going to be really weird to see John Jones, who is very Anderson Silva-esque, face Anderson Silva. I would love to see that fight. I mean, it's, as much as I don't think it'll actually happen, I think that would just be incredibly intense.
Yeah, I think especially with GSP being on the rack for so long, when you ask most fans of the sport who the two most dominant fighters are, and it also plays into St. Pierre winning a lot of decisions, not being able to finish people, where Silva and Jones have an incredible finish rate. Jones probably has shown the least weakness in his UFC career of the three. Obviously, St. Pierre is probably at the bottom of that list for taking 2 losses in the UFC to Matt Serra and Matt Hughes, but that also is a testament to how long he's been with the promotion. Silva, he really hasn't been tested too often, but that fight against Chael Sonnen, Sonnen dominated him 4.5 rounds, and really we haven't seen, other than that recent armbar against Vitor Belfort, we haven't seen Jones in trouble. And unlike Anderson, where he was in trouble for 4.5 rounds and was on the verge of actually losing that fight by a decision, Jones, even though he was injured, which is probably more of a testament to his willpower, he powered through, shook off the armbar in, I believe, something like a minute. And even with a broken up ulna, I believe was the bone he broke, he really, really looked tremendous, and that Jones St. Pierre fight is probably at the top of everyone's wish list. Dana White has hinted that, it's probably not going to be Jones's next fight, which the next fights, we'll get to that in a moment. But before we do, does anyone have anything else to add in about the actual fight itself before we start talking about their futures?
I think it was a very pleasant cap on the evening. I fully expected the flyweight fight to be more exciting than the light heavyweight title fight, and I could have potentially been wrong about that. It was a real good fight. It was a competitive match, much more so than I'm sure anyone had really imagined. So it was just it was a very surprising night and a very good night. Lots of great fights all the way around. I don't think one fight disappointed.
Ray?
I enjoyed the event overall. There was a few. I think I know we're all in the game where we make our predictions. As an event to pick, it was a nightmare because there were so many upsets. Now upsets are good to watch if but when you've got someone on it, obviously when you picked it, it's a little bit it makes you go, but get a little bit frustrated, I suppose. But it was a good night. I mean, I watched all the prelims. The prelims were good set up. The main card was good. Overall, I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was a really solid card.
Chris?
Yeah, as a fan, it was just nice to finally get some MMA, and it delivered. I mean, we had, a couple of decisions here and there, but it seemed like all the fighters were actually putting it on the line, which I really enjoy. Swanson, Kyle Noak, and Charlie Brenneman, and even the fights that went to decision, the co-main event and the third one between Bisping and Stan, they were great. I had no problems with them. The main event delivered, and it delivered in a way that not only was it exciting, but it was surprising, which is it's always nice to get a surprise, and I really enjoyed that.
Definitely. And talking about either fighter's next fight in the UFC, I'll start off with Belfort. We don't really know who he's gonna fight next. As far as whether it'll be a middleweight fighter or a light heavyweight fighter. If it's a middleweight fighter, we addressed it a little while ago. I love to see him take on Michael Bisping. I think, logically thinking it through, I would give the nod to Bisping because he looks like such a complete fighter. But then I think, but Vitor Belfort threatened John Jones, and John Jones would destroy Bisping. So, you never know how Vitor is going to come into that fight. Ever since Pride 32, you look at the people that Vitor's lost in his entire career. He's only lost to literally the greatest in MMA history. He lost 2 to Randy Couture, 1 to Chuck Liddell in his prime, 1 to Sakuraba, 1 to Ortiz in his prime, 2 to Alistair Overeem, who is a giant now. He lost to Henderson at Pride 32, and since that loss in 2006, the only 2 fights he's lost are Anderson Silva and John Jones. So, I mean, literally, the guy only loses to legends. He himself is a legend, and that would be an excellent, excellent test for Michael Bisping to figure out whether or not he actually warrants a title fight. I would love to see maybe Belfort and Bisping fight each other, fight the winner of Weidman and Bosch, and the winner of that move up to actually get a title shot. If he ends up staying at 205 pounds, there are a few guys who are coming off losses and are up there at the top of the 205-pound division. You have Rampage, obviously, who just had to back out against the fight against Glover Teixeira. You have Ryan Bader. You also have Rashad Evans. And logically, I want to give the favor to the opponent of Belfort in all 3 of those cases with Evans, Bader, and Jackson. But then I think, who threatened John Jones the most out of that entire group? Vitor Belfort. So it'll be really, really interesting to see what happens there. And as far as John Jones, there are 2 different scenarios. Who I think should fight him next, who I think is going to fight him next. Who I think Jones should fight next is Dan Henderson, even though he's coming off that knee injury. Jones himself is injured. He has nerve damage in his arm. It's definitely going to take a significant amount of months for him to come back and fight. We probably won't see him until the middle of 2013, probably. Henderson's timetable may be similar. That's what I think should happen. What do I think is going to happen? Dana White's hinted at Lyoto Machida fighting Dan Henderson. I don't know how verifiable it is, but I do know White himself said something about, you want to turn down a title fight, Lyoto. You saw what happened to Rashad Evans, so guess what? Now you have to fight Dan Henderson. So he's hinted that. I think that's probably going to happen, a Hendo Machida fight. And honestly, I think Jon Jones' next fight is going to be against Chael Sonnen. Dana hinted at it in the post-fight press conference. He said, well, I know Jones wants Sonnen and Sonnen wants Jones, and, if the fans say they want it, I got to give it to him. So he was strongly hinting at a Sonnen-Jones fight. Jones being injured, that makes complete sense. If Sonnen wins this fight against Forrest Griffin at the end of the year, we could legitimately see perhaps a May, June, July 2013 fight with the champion Jon Jones taking on the consummate title contender, the gangster from West Lynn, Chael Sonnen. What do you think about that, P-Money? Are you there, Patrick?
Oh, I am here. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties.
I put him to sleep.
What the hell, Patrick?
No, I'm just rife with technical difficulties over here. Not the smoothest sailing on my end, but as far as Chael for Jon Jones, like you said, he's got to get through Forrest Griffin first, and that's a fight that he lost already. Forrest Griffin submitted him by triangle the first time they met. So it'll be real interesting to see how that fight goes down. Forrest Griffin, he's a constantly underrated fighter, and I've made the mistake of doing it too. He really is a superb fighter, one of the best in the world. I'll go out there and say it. You go back and watch his fight with Rashad Evans when he lost his light heavyweight title. That's a fight he was winning soundly through the entire duration of that fight up until he just got clipped with one punch. And Rashad, he's got the speed, he's got the dynamite in his hands, to borrow a cliche, and that was pretty much that. But he does have very good striking. Well, he's got good striking, he's got a good ground game, and really it's the heart that that's really what sets him apart. So if Chael can get past Forrest Griffin, that's a step in the right direction. If he gets vaulted into a title shot just through popularity, like we've seen the UFC do, sadly, increasingly over the years, I don't think Sonnen really has much for Jones. But then again, hey, I didn't think Belfort had too much for Jones, but I knew, he certainly had a chance and is dangerous. But I just don't see Chael posing the same kind of dangerous threat that Vitor does, really, in any area, with his submission game, with his striking game. We saw him ground and pound on Anderson Silva with a 16-to-1 testosterone to epitestosterone ratio, and Anderson was still able to hang in there. So I just, hey, if he can earn it, great. But he's got to get a couple wins at light heavyweight for me to even believe that's a good choice. And, as far as Vitor Belfort and his next opponent, like you said, Jake, that really just depends on what weight class he ends up going into. And you had mentioned some really good names in there for him, Rampage and Ryan Bader, and Rashad Evans. And really, I think he's got a very good chance against any one of those guys. His takedown defense is pretty good for any division, I'd like to think. And, those hands, they're quick, they're accurate, they're insanely powerful. So I'd really like to see him perhaps even stay up at 205 and take a fight against any of those guys. I think he could easily knock out Bader. I think he could knock out Rampage. I think he can knock out Rashad Evans. Of course, any one of those fighters has the same chance and the same opportunity and same ability to do it to him. But I think those are good winnable fights, and I'd like to see him in against any of those opponents.
The one place I would disagree with you there, even though Forrest, I totally agree, up until he was champion, Forrest looked absolutely amazing. Still doesn't look bad, but I mean, honestly, I love Forrest Griffin, so I hate to say anything about him. I love his fight style. I love his personality. But ever since he lost the belt, I haven't seen that spark in the way he fights. That spark he had versus a Hector Ramirez, that first fight against Shogun, that Rampage fight. He's almost seemed just, definitely wants to win a fight, but just isn't really necessarily a motivated fighter anymore. And, Sonnen is the antithesis of a motivated fighter. And you mentioned Forrest beat Chael in the past. He beat Shogun in the past too, but Forrest at UFC 76 and Forrest at UFC 134, I believe it was, those were two completely different guys. One was up and coming, hungry for the belt, fighting his ass off. The other one, it almost seemed like in those pre-fight press conferences, like he had already relegated himself to losing the match, and he's been quiet in the immediate leading up to the Sonnen fight, which will probably be a good thing for him. The last thing you want to do is get engaged in a back and forth with Chael Sonnen. But what do you think about the motivation of Forrest Griffin, P-Money?
No, I think that's a really excellent point that you bring up there. Like you said, he was on the rise at in those early years, and when he was fighting for the title and when he was defending for the title, and his heart has come into question. How long is Forrest going to stay in this game? We saw him get knocked out by Shogun, who avenged his loss to Forrest Griffin in Brazil, as his wife was in labor. So, it's one of those things, was his head just not in the game? Is his head ever in the game anymore? You bring out some really valid points. So, yeah, well played on your part. You have shut me up, sir.
No, it's just, I honestly wish I agreed with you there. Just it's something. When I think about that fight, just that's the motivation I have for picking Sonnen over Griffin, because they really seem to be at the polar opposite sides of the motivation level. What about you, Ray? Where do you see Jones and Belfort going from this point forward?
Well, just going on about Balfour, I don't want to kind of repeat anything you just said, so I want to throw something new out there. But I personally would like to see Balfour get the matchup that we were supposed to see a few months ago, but we didn't. It didn't happen, which is Vanderlei Silva. Regardless of where they are in their career, regardless of win or lose record, both guys are legends of the sport. They've got history because of that, that crazy fight that they had at UFC Ultimate Brazil when Balfour was pretty well known, but at that time Vanderlei Silva wasn't. So yeah, I'd like to see that fight happen. As for John Jones, it's hard to give him an opponent at 205 because he is so dominant. But there's always been talks of him going up to heavyweight, and I'd like to see that happen. I don't know when that will happen. I hope that does happen in the future. But there's so many potential opponents for him at heavyweight, and we've seen Anderson Silva go up from 185 to 205. Even if John Jones went up and had a fight and then come back down, because he doesn't have to put on a lot of weight to make heavyweight. He probably walks around heavyweight anyway. So he could fight heavyweight. He could fight like a top 20 guy just to get him a heavyweight fight. Opponents are out there. One that comes off the top of my head is Matt Mitrione. He talked quite badly about John Jones. I wouldn't mind seeing that fight. I think it'd be an interesting fight to watch. Mitrione's a big guy. He could hit. He could throw punches. I think he would be a good test for John Jones. I think, especially with him being in a new weight class. So yeah, I think I'd like to see that rather than him having another 205. But again, it depends how long he's going to be out for with his arm as well.
Yeah, definitely. And unless any of you guys have any more thoughts to add on that UFC 152 card, I know I said at the top of the show we're aiming to make these roundtable shows about an hour long, but this was an amazing card. You have 4 hardcore MMA fans who've been waiting for 6 weeks to break down a card. But, yeah, we were really excited to do it, had a good time. I'll pass it back off to Ray, the host of MMA Mental. You have any shout-outs? Definitely tell them when it is, past guests, future guests. I'll give you the floor.
Cool, thanks, mate. Well, me and Patrick, we're always in talks to try and get guests on. So we've got a few. We're unsure, but I've got one guest definitely confirmed for this week, which is exciting. He's in the news at the moment because he's he pulled off probably one of the biggest upsets of the year. And after his upset, he's had an organisation try and take him to court. So we've actually managed to get Tyson Nam on, which is exciting because he's just obviously knocked out Eduardo Dantes. And then something else I've got lined up this week, which is it's a bit surreal. It's just kind of come out of nowhere. Is I've got I've been asked if I want to do a video conference with the former UFC heavyweight champion, which obviously I've jumped at. So on Wednesday at 6 p.m. CST time, which I believe is your time, Jake, I'll be doing a video conference with Andrei Arlovsky. So I'll certainly post the links out for people to come and watch that. And if any of you guys have got questions you want me to ask him, you can email them to me. But our email address is mmamental@hotmail.com. So get the questions to me, and obviously I'll ask them. But yeah, so I'm really looking forward to doing that. That'll be awesome as well.
Yeah, and that'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific for our U.S. listeners. And where can they jump on and find all your episodes and all that good stuff?
Yeah, check out our website. It's www.mmamental.com. We've got a podcast page. We've got all of our podcasts on there. We're also uploading videos of the actual separate interviews to YouTube. So just go onto YouTube and search MMA Mental. And also all our episodes are on iTunes as well.
Patrick, you have anything to add in as a co-MMA mentalist?
Yeah, just like Ray had alluded to, we got a great guest this week in Tyson Nam, and Ray and I, we always try and get the best guests we can, be it from UFC or Strikeforce or Bellator or, guys coming up on the local circuit, your Dustin Ortiz's. We recently had on Mike Biggie Rhodes, who's out of Rufus Sport. He's 3-0 as a professional, looks like a real promising 170-pound welterweight. So, we've had some big names, and we're hoping to have some even bigger names in the future, and heck, hoping to break some names and introduce the new guys to all the fans who might not get to hear about them otherwise. So, we're real pleased. We got this co-promotion going on with you, Jake, and you, Chris, over at the MMA Podcast, and I'm looking forward to doing this MMA Roundtable every Monday at 4 Pacific, 7 Eastern.
Exactly. I was actually just about to touch on before we sign off. I really honestly think both of our podcasts are good contrasts of each other. Both are MMA centric and really do appeal to the hardcore MMA fans, where we don't need to stop and explain, who Bibiano Fernandez is, or stop and explain what a submission is, what a key lock is. This is really tuned toward the MMA fan, both of our podcasts, whereas MMA Mental, very straightforward, really breaks down, really gets into the grit of MMA. They have a lot of guests on, every single week, where we may have 1 or 2 guys a week. You all have 3 or 4 excellent guests a week, whereas Chris and I just, like to talk about poop and screw around and laugh at stuff and generally be jackasses. But both really are a yin and yang of each other. I listen to both along with the Rogan and Corolla podcasts and enjoy them all really thoroughly. Our podcast, I guess, it's only right if we shout out our own podcast as well. Chris, did you want to add in something real quick?
Yeah, man, I just wanted to say that it's an honor, and to rehash what he said, it's just really nice to be talking to you guys. I mean, I think we get a lot of different viewpoints, and we may agree on a lot of stuff, but most importantly, I feel that I could seduce 100% more women if I sounded like Ray Thompson and stopped talking about my poop.
God, I think I mentioned it. Our last episode of the podcast, we had Patrick on, and we all chatted after the podcast. I think I put the figure at $100,000 is what I would pay to swap voices with Ray, whereas I have sort of a sometimes too high pitch, sometimes too low, sort of almost a monotone, like you can't really tell where in the U.S. I'm from. It's just very, very bland, whereas Ray has probably the most sexy voice I've ever heard. No homo.
I've got the perfect voice and the perfect face for radio.
God dang it, I'm very aroused right now. But no.
We all are.
Yeah, yeah, the MMA podcast, we air every Wednesday. I can't even remember what time we air. Yeah. We air at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We have a live podcast every Wednesday, along with this live podcast every Monday at 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific. We've actually had ourselves some pretty decent guests on recently. We've had Mark Hominick, Ian McCall, Chris Lieben, Eddie Bravo. We had Bravo on for about 45 minutes. That was a really amazing chat, as was our chat with John Anik, who was so well spoken, really kind of, listening to that. We'll ask him a random question. He'll go on like this 2-paragraph, beautifully organized answer that makes me sit here and look like an absolute fool. Coming up, I'm not sure whether it'll be next week or the week after, but we actually have 2 guests we're really excited to bring you. We have Michael Schiavello, who outside of the UFC is probably the most well-known play-by-play guy, famous for his "Good night, Irene" sign-off. And we also have, I don't know if I mentioned this at the top of the show, but we're getting Mad Flavor Joey Coco Diaz on. I spoke with him last night, and we're going to be able to break down MMA with one of the top stand-up comedians in the country right now, and that's really going to be a lot of fun. We had Misha Tate on a couple weeks ago, who really was brutally honest with her. She was brutally honest with us. She talked about Ronda Rousey. We didn't even ask. She brought her up herself. Was going into a depth about how she's not training for a fight now, kind of going on a hiatus to reclaim that fire that she didn't feel in the Julie Kedzie fight. So yeah, she was really brutally honest with her. So definitely check out all of those past episodes. Lieben was probably had the craziest stories, though. Went into detail about the deer he kept in his uncle's trunk for 2 weeks, and his mom cut apart with a chainsaw. His uncle shooting himself in the foot. There was lots of great stuff he went on about in that. But definitely check us out at Twitter. We're the MMA Podcast. Obviously, you can log on, like I said before, themmapodcast.com every Wednesday and check us out. So do any of you gentlemen have anything to add in before we sign out?
Just want to say thank you to you all. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Patrick?
Yeah, and thanks Jake, and thanks Chris for getting together with Ray and I and doing this thing, and looking forward to doing it next week.
Chris?
We gone.
We gone. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.